Hello and welcome to the Democracy Exchange Festival. My name is Jessie Carson and I am the lead designer and communities coordinator for Participedia. I'll just give you a quick rundown of what you can expect in our workshop today. This session is called Crowdsourcing Global Knowledge about Democratic Innovations, an Introduction to Participedia. So we'll hear from various members of Participedia's international and multidisciplinary team. Beginning with a brief history of the project as told by our managing director, Pat Scully. Then we'll hear from our new director and fearless leader, Bonnie Ibarro, about our plans for the next phase of Participedia. Our design and technology lead, Amber Frid-Jimenez, will introduce our approach to design research, and I then will give you a little tour of our open source crowdsourcing platform. Finally, two of our longtime team members, Julian Landry and Bettina von Leers, will talk about how they put Participedia into action. And then we'll end with a conversation about how all of you might also envision putting Participedia into action yourselves. So I'll begin by acknowledging that as a person of settler heritage, I am deeply grateful, but also an uninvited guest on the ancestral traditional territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. This is also known as Vancouver, Canada. So here in Canada, we practice land acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation. And I just want to quickly share a quote that I find particularly helpful in understanding why this is important. I'll share my screen. So to acknowledge this land on which we stand is to acknowledge truth. This quote is from the website whos.land, which is a Canadian resource for identifying the territory where you are located and a really great starting place to understand this history a little bit better. I'd like you to invite to share your land acknowledgement in the chat if you're able to. But this quote really resonates with me because what I'm learning about reconciliation and acknowledgement is that it's not just about speaking the truth, but it's really about reckoning with it so that we can learn how to do better and be better. And it's actually really about healing. So one quick example of acknowledging truth related to the work that we do with Participedia actually is to look at democracy through this lens. And if you reckon with the history there, you'll understand that our systems of governance have deep roots in inequity, colonialism, and the centering of privilege and power. And so acknowledging this truth and reckoning with it actually allows us to see a clear path to change and work towards healing. It allows us to do better and be better and innovate a democracy that centers equity instead. So yeah, that really brings us forward into the main event. We're here today to talk about democratic innovations, and I'm going to hand it over now to Pat, who will set the stage with a history of Participedia. Thank you, Pat.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Pat Scully, and I'm the Managing Director of Participedia. So my task is to provide a brief overview of the origin, mission, and goals of Participedia. I'll start with, and I will be brief, I promise. I'll start with Participedia's mission, which is to strengthen and mobilize knowledge about democratic innovations throughout the world. And by democratic innovations, we mean any actions or methods that, one, get people involved in problem solving and decision-making about shared challenges. Two, bring people together as a community using participatory engagement methods. And three, instill democratic values such as inclusion, trust, and respect. Democratic innovations vary widely in form. The goal of most of them is not to replace traditional systems of government, but to work alongside or inform the work of institutions such as representative legislatures, government agencies, and civil society organizations. These innovations began to emerge as early as the 1950s with the increasing use of mandated public hearings and public comment on proposed administrative rules, but they really began to take off in the 1990s. By the late 1990s, researchers and practitioners working in the field of democratic innovations began to focus on the need to do a more comprehensive job of documenting these activities. Yes, there was a growing number of small-scale studies, but for the most part, information was hard to find. So while there was and still is lots of information readily available about elections, legislatures, administrative agencies, and lobbyists, and so on, it was hard for people who wanted to learn more about this rapidly growing field of thought and action and to learn how democratic innovations work. A key insight of the founders of Participedia, Professors Arkhan Fung at the Harvard Kennedy School and Mark Warren at the University of British Columbia's Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions, was that the rapid growth of democratic innovations across the globe suggests that we may be in the midst of a transformation of democracy, a shift that could be as revolutionary as the development throughout much of the world of representative party-based democracy and for the right of all adults to vote. In addition, Fung and Warren saw that with so much experimentation going on throughout the world, it would be impossible to identify and analyze it all using traditional research methods. Much of the relevant information was being collected by practitioners who designed and implemented those innovations. But few, if any, official records of this type of work are collected. Fung and Warren's solution was to create the first Participedia website in 2009 to see whether it might be possible to crowdsource information and make that information freely available in an open source format. The first rudimentary website provided a proof of concept that allowed us to be awarded support in the form of a partnership grant from Canada's Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. And for those of you on this who are not Canadian, it's known to most by its acronym SHIRK. This support helped us complete two major rebuilds of Participedia's platform at participedia.net, about which Jesse Carson and Amber Frida-Menes will tell you more in a few minutes. Even more important, SHIRK's funding supported Participedia's efforts to grow into a network of 30 universities and non-governmental organizations, over 50 professional researchers and practitioners, scores of student research assistants who contribute their smarts and energy to every aspect of the project, hundreds of other students and mid-career professionals who have contributed content to the website as part of class assignments and professional skills training, and users located in over 120 countries who have entered or edited information into participedia.net. All these people have contributed to the creation of what is now the world's largest repository of information about participatory governance. As of today, Participedia's content includes narrative descriptions and associated data for at least 330 method entries and over 1,600 cases, and growing, available in 7 languages. To summarize, the briefest way to explain what Participedia has been doing for the last 11 years is helping to build online tools and global networks that are mapping democratic innovations throughout the world, with the main focus being on innovations in participatory governance, innovations work and why they work, assessing their contributions, and transferring this knowledge into the practice of designing and implementing democratic innovations. And last but not least, developing a new model of collaboration in social science. This is the essence of what we think of as the first phase of Participedia. We're about to move into a new phase, and so next I'd like to turn things over to Professor Bonnie Abawa of McMaster University, who is leading the effort to not only build on what Participedia is already doing, but also take it into new and exciting directions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pat, for that introduction to Participedia Phase 1. So like Pat said, I'll be talking about Participedia Phase 2, which is the next phase of the Participedia project. So Participedia 1, as Pat just emphasized, was for us a proof of concept of what is possible. We've built a platform that is able to aggregate and curate democratic innovations from around the world. In the next phase of Participedia, we want to expand that proof of concept. Participedia Phase 2 will address current challenges in democracy and democratization in 5 new ways. And I will just outline some of the new ways that we are going to be approaching democratic innovations. The first is that in Phase 2, we're going to expand our focus from participatory governance, which was the central focus of Phase 1, into 6 new areas. And I'll just name them: participatory governance, continuing from Phase 1, human and political rights, democratic accountability, democratic representation, democracy across border, and democracy and digital communication. So there's going to be an expansion of the scope of Participedia. The second new dimension of Participedia Phase 2 will be that we will be attempting to build the analytic theory and data models to support platform development for each of these new areas. So that will involve expanding the current platform to accommodate the new research agenda in these various new research clusters. The third new dimension of Participedia will be to reach more to addressing the democratic challenges, and the problems of democracy and democratization present in the global South. One of the feedback we received from Participedia Phase 1 was that we didn't do quite enough in addressing some of the problems of democratic innovations in the global South. So we will, in Phase 2, be paying a little bit more attention to some of the challenges in the global South. The fourth new dimension of Participedia will be, it will now be a bit more focused on providing contextual and ethnographic analysis of democratic innovation. So while we have quite a few case studies on the platform already, we will be digging deeper by contextualizing these cases and providing a bit more ethnographic data. And then finally, Phase 2 Participedia will build on new capacities for knowledge mobilization. We will add additional capacities to transfer knowledge of democratic innovations into the public sphere in direct response to democratic deficits and opportunities. So we are going to be building new knowledge mobilization strategies targeted at specific audiences, whether they be civil servants or practitioners or students or NGOs. The knowledge mobilization component or the research communication component of Participedia is going to be a little bit more expanded. What I'll do next is to speak just a little bit to some of the core research agenda of the various clusters, just to give you a sense of what we'll be doing in each of the new clusters that will form the basis of Participedia Phase 2. So let us start with the democratic accountability research cluster. Now, this cluster will be focused mainly on identifying and documenting new forms of vertical accountability that involve participation by citizens, social organizations, local communities, all seeking to increase the transparency and responsiveness of government. And there are many cases of this. We all know examples would be protest movements like the Black Lives Matter movement, which can serve to motivate public agencies to develop new accountability mechanisms. And we are seeing experiments with democratic accountability that also flow across borders. Many international organizations, such as the World Bank's Global Partnership for Social Accountability, have been experimenting with innovative accountability processes that directly involve those they serve, especially in weak state contexts. So these are some of the examples of what we'll be focusing on in the democratic accountability cluster. The democratic representation cluster will focus more on representative relationships in democratic context. We are especially interested in identifying, mapping, and understanding innovative forms of representation that serve to advance inclusion and underrepresented groups, classes, peoples, and issues. While not primarily focused upon the much studied topic of elections, the research cluster on democratic representation will also include innovations that focus on electoral participation, particularly in contexts where participation is highly biased by class, education, gender, ethnicity, and other common cleavages. For the democracy across borders cluster, we're interested here in democratic innovations that transcend national borders or cut across national borders. And there are several examples of this, whether it be climate change or refugee flows or irregular migration. These are all issues that go beyond any one nation state. We are especially interested in cross-border innovations with democratic potentials, such as deliberative polling in the context of the European Union. Another example is the United Nations Declaration on the Right of Indigenous People and indigenous solidarity movements that cut across national boundaries. So these kind of cross-border democratic innovations will be the focus of the Democracy Across Borders cluster. And then we have democracy and digital communication. Everything is digital these days. And so in some ways, this cluster cuts across all our fields of studies. Digital strategies that use social media to spread rumors and to micro-target voters represent a clear and present danger to democracy, as we've all noticed with the electoral processes in many parts of the world, even in advanced democracies. At the same time, innovations in digital democracy are proving essential to broadening inclusion, scaling smaller deliberative processes to broader politics, and facilitating representative government around the world. We are interested in tracking online forms and projects that still exhibit the potential that excited this project from the beginning. This cluster will, in particular, track such innovations in democratic participation that draw on artificial intelligence, AI, to assist and enable large-scale deliberative processes. And then finally, there's the human and political rights cluster, which I am directly involved in. And this is, as we all know, there are, in the past few decades, there has been an erosion of political and civil rights in many countries around the world. In the field of human rights, there's already talk about a post-human rights era, given the scale back of human rights protections around the world. But we assert that even as human rights ideals and systems and laws are being scaled back, individuals, citizens, and groups are innovating, adopting innovative strategies to demand civil and political rights. We are interested in those movements to reclaim human rights within civil spaces. We're particularly interested in attempts to vernacularize human rights ideals, human rights principles, and human rights norms. And a classic example of this will be the whole discourse of Ubuntu in South Africa, for instance, where local activists and local human rights practitioners are attempting to draw on indigenous ways of knowing, on indigenous traditions, to reinforce universal human rights within their communities. So these are some of the kind of innovations that we'll be looking at. And what Participedia Phase 2 does so well for us is that it allows clusters of researchers, practitioners, students, and many other stakeholders to focus on particular democratic challenges with a view of expanding our knowledge of these various areas of democratic innovation. Finally, I just want to mention that one of the unique attributes of Phase 2, and we are building on Phase 1 here, is that we're really interested in reinforcing or strengthening the role of Participedia as a global classroom for democratic innovation. I know one of my colleagues will be speaking more about this shortly, but we're really interested not just in the research dimensions of this project, but how we can use Participedia as a tool for education, not just of regular students or traditional students, but also non-traditional students, practitioners, civil servants, and other stakeholders who might find our research relevant to the work they do in democracy. I'll stop there, and I don't know who's next, but I'll pass it on to Jessie.
Thanks. It's actually Amber's up next.
Hi, yeah. Thanks, Bonnie. Pat and Jesse. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to contribute here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the design of Participedia.net, which is the online platform that supports this global community of activists and scholars. I lead the design and technology team, and we are responsible for the design and development of the online interface, code, and data repository. And I do this with Jesse and a few other members of our small team. So we were invited. I thought what I would do is I'd briefly sort of talk about our approach, and then I would turn it over to Jesse, who is our lead designer and communities coordinator, to talk about how the platform works and ways that you can contribute. But I wanted to touch on a little bit of my experience in my role. And so we were invited to work on the project many years ago when Participedia was still on its alpha version. We started by reviewing and evaluating the design of the platform as we found it. And we were asked to redesign it to better serve our community and to remain current with contemporary technologies. And one of the first observations that we made was that despite the success of the alpha version and the sort of how much we really respected and liked the community that was involved in making it, we noticed that there was a disconnection between the openness of the community and the way that the technology and the code was being designed and accessed, which at the time operated on a standard client and service model and made sense at the time as a proof of concept. But what we recognized when we started was Participedia's core aim is inclusive, that to bring activists and scholars together to crowdsource local knowledge of civic participation on a global scale is an inclusive project. So if our goal was to invite as many diverse voices together as possible to document the full breadth of innovation happening across the world, we hypothesized that extending the principle of inclusion to encompass the design of the technology itself and its team, that would help us achieve our goals. So as a core part of our design research, our team embraced one key principle in our Participedia research, and that is that it's a platform about participation should itself be participatory. This might seem obvious, but creating an inclusive technology platform challenges traditional norms in the tech industry, which tends to be exclusive along gender and race lines. So we took the big move many years ago to shift from a closed source model, client service model, to an open source code base built from the ground up, which enable and open and easily accessible online. And this enables us to focus on student mentorship. So in line with what Bonnie mentioned about a global classroom, to extending the idea of the classroom, not just to political science, students of political science, but also to those interested in participation. Those students are interested in the sort of data and more technical side of participatory processes. So we, in building and shifting to an open source code base, we were able to focus on student mentoring and creating opportunities for women and LGBTQ+ who are underrepresented in the tech sector to get involved in the project. And we also took the move to engage with this multidisciplinary network of collaborators and in the design process to identify, to start identifying biases within the data model, and also to help to kind of provide a sort of pathway for the scholars and activists in our network who are less sort of engaged with technology on their day-to-day lives to become sort of more involved in helping us co-design the platform and embedding values of equity and inclusion into the design research and platform itself. So we've been working, and Jesse can tell you a little bit more about this, but have designed a multilingual platform with an interactive geocoded map, and with the hopes that these aspects or these features would lower the barrier of entry to serve our diverse contributors from different backgrounds, contexts, and languages. We built the platform to be as accessible and responsive on mobile phones as on desktops. So those that are in more remote contexts with less access to specific technologies, a chance to contribute. We are also doing this on a limited budget. So really sort of thinking about ways to engage a broad audience of computer scientists that have time and the inclination to work on this problem, and invite those people with those skills into the project. And so we really recognize we're at a good place now to kind of take on this next phase. And we recognize that our work is really just beginning, and we will continue to be challenged in unique ways by as we broaden our work to include the 6 challenge areas that Bonnie mentioned. And we are really looking forward to sort of looking at the countervailing phenomenon of the threats to the democracy that we face and the threats to human rights on the one hand, and citizens and communities that continue to test new forms of collective processes to empower themselves. So, thank you.
Thanks, Amber. I'll just give you a real quick tour of the platform so you can see what we're talking about here. I'm just gonna bring up my screen. So as Amber mentioned, we intentionally designed this platform to be mobile accessible, and the site also now supports multiple languages, and that's really, we're aiming for inclusion here. So in fact, we actually recently heard from a teacher in Brazil who told us that because the site is now available in Portuguese, he's using Participedia in the classroom and increasing his students' confidence in being able to compare global examples of participatory politics to the Brazilian context, which is really nice to hear some of this feedback coming in from the wider community. Anyone can contribute to Participedia by publishing a new entry or editing an existing entry, pretty much like Wikipedia, hence the name. So just click the quick submit button to get started. And I'll give you a few quick tips for contributors. First of all, we recommend that you use the site in your preferred language by selecting it from that drop-down menu so that our translation system will work correctly. And second, the entry forms have 2 views, the quick submit view and the full version view. The quick submit view is designed to lower the barrier of entry to the site and allow people to quickly contribute or contribute from areas where the internet access is not so good, and provide some basic information about an initiative so that another researcher or themselves or a student could then use that as a jumping off point to flesh it out later on. We would call that type of entry a stub. So clicking the full version will reveal all the possible data fields for an entry, including the long form narrative text. And we'll be launching a new Getting Started guide on the site very soon, but you can also check out our help page for more information and also detailed guidelines for publishing and editing on the site. A key feature of Participedia is obviously our search interface. You can do a full text search from any page on the website and then find results by location using the interactive map. And then if you click into the tabs below the map, you can further drill down into your search results using search filters. And those are linked to the data that's collected in those forms. Soon we'll be launching the ability to download sets of search results as CSV files, but you can already access real-time downloads of all of Participedia data for cases, methods, and organizations, and that's available on our research page already. I just want to give you a quick insight of the types of entries you might find on the site. So I've chosen a few cases to highlight this a little bit. This is a case called Participatory Slum Upgrading in Buenos Aires, and that describes an inclusive process for housing security and collaborative urban planning. The Women's March, a very familiar large-scale grassroots organizing example, which is one of many documented on the site. This example is actually student researchers from Participedia, team members, collaborated with an advocacy organization called Black Sash to organize arts-based participatory research in rural South Africa. And this was in support of seniors and people with disability to access social grants. And in this case, the Participedia platform was actually intentionally used all the way through to document the participatory research as it was being undertaken, a sort of a unique way to use the site, which I thought was really interesting. And this case is also one of many examples from the Global South that could facilitate North-South learning. And I think Bettina will be touching on this a little bit later. So the thing about a crowdsourcing platform is that it's awesome to create this historic archive that continually be built upon, and it can also be used to rapidly document emerging innovations. So when the coronavirus pandemic began disrupting the world, the Participedia community immediately began documenting this surge of participatory responses that we saw. So if you visit participedia.net, you'll see that we have a feature called collections. It's accessed by the tabs, the all cases methods collections. And we built this to exactly to respond to these kind of urgent moments. So to enable the community to begin to make sense of all of this. And collections are essentially curated lists of crowdsourced entries that relate to specific emergent themes in participatory governance. The COVID-19 response collection documents a wide range of civic actions, from the public singing example that I just showed you to protests and mutual aid campaigns. Another collection, the Public Participation for Racial Justice collection, includes diverse forms of public participation for securing racial justice, such as protests, advocacy campaigns, community organizing, and shared governance through an explicit racial equity lens. And the D&T team, the design and technology team, is actively documenting our design research. So if you're interested in learning more about this, please get in touch. I put my email in the chat. And yeah, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm going to now hand over the floor to Julian and Bettina, who will talk about using Participedia to enhance global learning and practitioner and student learning.
Thank you, Jessie. So yes, I'll share a little bit about what International Institute to work with the Participedia platform to support the learning of practitioners. So the Coady Institute is housed on the campus of St. Francis Xavier University in Nova Scotia. But we are, for the past 6 years, we have been a training institute, leadership programming for development, community development practitioners interested in this context, in strengthening democracy, advocacy, accountability, and a more participatory governance in their own context. So diverse groups of learners, mostly from the Global South, but with robust experience in the field as practitioners. So we use methodologies that are participatory and based in adult learning methodologies, and we try to use the practice and the experience of our learners to engage theory. So we use Participedia in two kind of instances to support the learning. One is that we use it in the class, and then we also use it to our participants and move beyond our intensive courses and go back to the field. In the classroom, as part of our kind of learner-centered, action-oriented methodologies, we use the platform to fulfill a really key role with democratic practitioners who are often exhausted and disillusioned and come with facing mounting challenges, as we all know. Is that Participedia shows a window into what is possible, and it connects all kinds of detailed experiences in democratic practice to their own context and reality. So starting to make links as learners that are really key in terms of unlocking a bit of the hope that is much needed as a practitioner to go back and to apply some of those democratic innovations in their own context. So the case studies, the methods, and the organizations help show what is possible, and also kind of provides legitimacy to some of the experiences and challenges that they've been once learners go back to their practice, back to the field, their organizations, that's when we platform in terms of producing case studies based on their real life and professional experience. So we support them by providing them a template with a structured kind of reflection on their ongoing practice, which serves to both produce a case study for the Participedia platform, but also serves as a key sort of reflection practice. That while they might be busy strengthening democracy in their own ways, reflection and synthesis and learning. So in other words, we expose practitioners to myriad new ways of doing democracy in the classroom, but by supporting the development of case studies and this kind of intentional kind of reflection cycle while they're back in the field, we're reinforcing the learning that happens by and because we employ Participedia within an adult learning methodology, which is aligned in substance with the values of democracy, then it also strengthens this notion of the citizen at the center, or the learner at the center. It's self-directed, it's participatory, and welcoming of conflicting views and different perspectives. I just want to highlight a couple of the key sort of learnings that I've heard from some of our graduates who have gone through this process with Participedia. So beyond kind of the increase in knowledge in terms of in producing a case study, there's also some skills building in terms of their ability to tell a better story, to write for different audiences, to articulate complex ideas. And we know for advocates that these are skills that are particularly important. What's interesting is the attitudinal shifts that happen as well, as some of our graduates state being more confident in their analytical skills, that they've learned to apply, really allow in a project that they might have been a part of, that maybe they realized that more people were involved, that the case study needed more systematic ways of engaging with particular sets of citizens, etc. So there's a real kind of taking stock of your experience and framing that within a model of participatory platform is so key in advancing. Another example is kind of seeing a success in democratic practice when you maybe hadn't done so before. So one of our graduates stated that they might have, before they wrote the case, they felt they didn't achieve the policy goals that they wanted to, but having gone through it and reflected upon it, that they did achieve meaningful. So what I would conclude by saying is just that for us, Participedia is, one of its core strengths is that it enables practitioners to see themselves and their experience as part of a larger movement, which in these times is increasingly important, as oftentimes activists and practitioners tend to feel a bit maybe isolated against these mounting assaults on democratic practice. And just as a final just example of how we have found that the platform is nimble is the COVID-19 series that Jesse spoke of. For us was a really great opportunity to re-engage some of the graduates that we'd worked with, to kind of go through a second iteration of reflection in action, but this time focused on how are they adapting their practice in light of these heightened changes and measures as a response to COVID-19. So I think I'll just leave it there and pass it on to Bettina to speak a little bit about the experience in the undergraduate setting.
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Bettina van Leeres, and I teach in the International Development Studies program at the University of Toronto in Scarborough. And I use Participedia in my undergraduate classrooms, where I teach courses on citizen action and citizen engagement in the global south, mainly in Africa. And so my students write up cases for Participedia, focusing mainly on Southern Africa, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, South Africa, Namibia, and Angola. And I found Participedia very useful in an undergraduate classroom for two main reasons. The first is that it facilitates South-North learning, right? Usually when we think about democracy learning, there's a tendency to think about North-South learning. You know, what can the South learn from the North? Well, I invert that in my classrooms and I ask, what can the North learn from the South? And in particular, what can we learn from democratic innovations in Africa? I'm very interested in that question. And I want to highlight two issues. So a lot of the African cases of democratic innovation on the site address building democracy in places or situations with systemic racism and high economic inequality. And which of course is a global problem. It's not just a problem of the global South. And so some of the cases really point to the importance of informal forms of democratic innovations like social protest, and how in contexts with systemic racism and high economic inequality, social protest can be a very, very important form of democratic innovation because it builds the collective capacities of marginalized communities to make claims and to hold governments accountable. So for example, there's an interesting case about Mozambique on the platform, looking at the role of social protests around rising living costs and rising prices of bread. And so the African cases really point to the importance of protest as an important form of democratic innovation. The other thing that the African cases do and what they can teach us is that they teach us about how inaccessible democratic institutions are for very marginalized communities. So the case that Jessie spoke about from South Africa with the Black Sash, you know, showed how when the South African government put in place a new infrastructure for social grant delivery, which it thought was more democratic and accessible, it turned out to be less accessible for the most marginalized people in the community. So democratic institutions do not necessarily mean greater accessibility. And this is what the African cases can teach us. And so I find Participedia very exciting for South-North learning. And then the only other thing I wanted to say was that I think that Participedia, as Bonnie and Julian said, you know, it provides hope. It shows us that there's a global movement and energy for democracy. And my students and I always feel so energized when we work with the Participedia platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Bettina. Thank you, Julian. We had hoped, but you know, this always happens. We went a little bit long. Everybody's great. So we were going to put people in breakout rooms for a while so that you could talk a little bit about what you've heard and raise some ideas. But I think because of the time, and we want to make this, it is Participedia, we'd like to make it a little bit more participatory. So just want to open this conversation. And I'll start with the questions. Does anybody have anything they would like to share about how they envision ways Participedia might be useful in things that you care about and things that you're passionate about? It could be your work, it could be your activism, it could be part of research you're doing. Just any ideas? You could just either raise your hand using the raise your hand button under reactions, or you could just wave at me, or you could send us a text on chat. Does anybody want to share anything?
Lena's raising her hand.
Hello, everybody. This is fascinating. So I work with an organization called Search for Common Ground, and we do peace building across the world. And we're always trying to create communities of practice of practitioners, but also people who are learning about peace building. And we're also doing a lot of COVID response in conflict affected areas. So this platform has so many beautiful features that are so attractive to creating a community of practice. So I'm curious, like, how much are you trying to mostly create a set of resources versus creating that community of users? And I think it's a bit of both, and you're having success clearly in both areas, but I'd just love to hear your thoughts about that. Thanks.
Maybe I'll start. I'll say a couple words, and then I'd like some of my colleagues to say something. You know, it's interesting. I think as the project started, Lena, it really did start as almost a technological fix. Let's see if we can crowdsource via a website. But we learned before not too long that the power of creating new networks and connections of people was as important, if not more important, than the website itself. So yes, we would like to continue to find ways to help support communities of practice as well as communities of research. I don't know if any of my other colleagues want to talk about that. And one of our co-investigators on the project, who has since retired at the University of Alberta, actually did some focused experimentation with asking people who were practitioners at how it was useful. And there's a small paper on that if anybody is interested in that, I can put my email in the chat and you could ask me about it and I could send that to you. Any follow-up on that about communities of practice and how they might be useful, or any other comments about people or suggestions about ways you think this might be useful and things that you care about? You want to wave? Bettina?
Yeah. Hi, Lena. I don't know if this addresses your question, but you know, I do a lot of work in South Africa, and increasingly I've been hearing about how useful the platform is for South African practitioners to reflect on the challenges and the barriers to democracy building. And they are increasingly using the platform as a way of also looking for, you know, cases where people have grappled with the difficulties of building democracy. And for me, that speaks to a community of practice. You know, it's not just about sharing what works, but it's also about sharing solutions to barriers.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add, you know, at a kind of institutional scale, this notion of communities of practice and particularly and also communities of learning is something that we're quite intentional about with our kind of ongoing learning and practice work. And Participedia has really offered me personally a space within which to form a bit of a community of people who've gone through this process of reflection and writing, and in particular when we did the COVID piece with a subset of this community, I think, you know, a lot of those individuals who are from, you know, 7 or 8 different countries across Asia and Africa do keep in touch and do keep tabs on each. It's been useful for me at that level. Thanks for the question.
Bonnie, I wonder if you could maybe speak a little to how you, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but as you think about moving forward, the role that Participedia can play in creating communities of practice that interact with research communities.
Yeah, so this is something that we are building into phase 2's knowledge mobilization plan. In phase 1, the main knowledge mobilization tool was the platform itself. But in phase 2, one of the things we want to do is that we want to target specific knowledge mobilization initiatives to various groups of users and stakeholders. So for instance, one of the more community engaged activity we'll be involved with will be hosting workshops, organizing workshops, democracy summits, and the idea behind all of this is to provide an opportunity for researchers and practitioners in Participedia to deliberate with communities of practices, whether they're civil servants or NGO workers, in a way that allows for what we call a co-production, a knowledge co-production processes. So we're not just going there, studying these cases, updating the cases, building theories and models and archiving data, but we are also actually co-producing new research alongside these communities that are actually involved in the work of organizing these innovations that we study. And there's already conversations we've had, for instance, with the Privy Council. So the Privy Council has been interested in the work and we do. And I see that as a very unique and distinct community of practice. One of the interesting aspect of the Phase 2 application is that we have quite a fair bit of practitioners on the team. So, you know, the old saying, those who know do, those who can't teach. So it's always important to have those who are actually doing the work, those who are in the trenches of activism and democracy work be part of this project. So I'm particularly glad that we have practitioners who are working as collaborators with us based in India. We have a collaborator from an NGO in India. We have a collaborator from the Ghana Institute of Public Management, which is the national institute charged with the training of civil servants in Ghana. And these collaborators bring unique practitioner and community of practice perspective to the project. And I think this will not only shape how we mobilize knowledge, but even how we design the research. So they will be integral to working within the clusters to shape the research design and the research agenda, hopefully in ways that meet unique and real needs that they find in their everyday practice as they do their work.
Thank you, Bonnie. So anybody else, does this spark any ideas? We've just got a couple of minutes left, but I want to give anybody else who might want to ask a question. It doesn't have to be about the question that I originally asked. If there's any questions or suggestions that you might have about the way Participedia as either the platform or the network could be useful to you. Again, I want to emphasize, as Jesse said, that while there much of the work that we a formal project funded by SSHRC, Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada, it is not a closed shop. Anybody is invited to be part of this. And by contributing, get in touch, you can go to the info@participedia.net address and drop us a note if you've got questions or suggestions. But anyway, does anybody have any other questions, comments they'd like to make? Just wave, raise your hand. I see Jesse just put the contact us email address in the chat.
This is Sabrina here. I have a question.
Yes, hey Sabrina. Oh, hi Sabrina.
Hi, this is so wonderful. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's really amazing to learn about this work. I was a few minutes late. I apologize for that. So I hope you didn't cover this already, but I'm very curious about your analytics and, you know, what is your most popular case study? Have you seen a shift in what people are accessing? The what can the North learn from the South piece is really compelling as well. I wonder how that factors in. And just generally on the analytics side, what are you keeping an eye on and what's been really significant to you in the last 6 months?
Do you have an insight into that, Jesse? I'm bad. I'm not really fully prepared to do that in a concrete way. I have some ideas of some general shifts. Do you have any numbers?
I don't have any access to the numbers right now, Sabrina, but it's a great question, and it is something that the design
Broad
team is
strokes.
looking at.
Yeah, broad strokes is all I'm really interested in. Like, you know, when you say mutual aid campaigns, for instance, right? Like, have those submissions shot up over the last 6 months? How are they being accessed the most? I'm just curious if this can be a mirror into current events. And I'm always curious about, you know, especially when you have a funder like SSHRC, having that balance of practitioner and academic involvement, you know, like the theory and the practice. So, you know, you don't have to have a perfect answer for me right now, but everything you talked about is so rich, and that's just what was coming to mind for me. I can't help but be nosy about things like that.
No, it's totally true. And it does, I think, reflect current events and things that are going on in the world. And one of the things we track are search terms. The majority of people who come to the site come through organic search. That's much higher than other ways. And I think it's because of the rich text-based narratives that are in the entries. But I've noticed a lot of references in the search terms. One that stood out for the past while is called participatory rural appraisal. There's others, and I think it'd be really interesting to do sort of a report on that and compare to current events as well. But yeah, great question, and definitely something we're looking at.
If I may add, so we're interested, and I think we're tracking not just what people are searching for, but how they are searching for this information. So for instance, it is estimated that 80% of online users in the developing world access the internet on their mobile phones, just because of the level of infrastructure. So one of the things that I was very interested in from the very beginning of Participedia is how many people are accessing the platform on mobile devices. And is that changing over time? Because that's also an indication, because as people have more resources in the developing world, they're able to get desktop computers. So that percentage, in a way, it's somehow something we can track. And I was glad to know that Participedia is able to track how, you know, users access this information, which I think is quite interesting.
And I would say, in terms of broad trends, partially over the life of the project so far, but in the last few years, just as a couple of examples. One, and I think Bettina and Julian can speak to this, is that there are examples where once you start developing more content around a certain issue or in a certain part of the globe, that generates more interest and it snowballs a bit. So we've had much more interest in, again, particularly in Africa, based on some of the work Bettina and Julian and others have done, and that just sort of picks up steam after a while. There's another partner we have who has been tracking work primarily in Latin America. And so lately we've added a lot of content from there. So some of it is not strictly organic. It can be that someone has contacted us, they're interested, and we urge any of you on the call who want to do that. There are particular trends, issues, areas of the world they're following, and they begin uploading a lot of content related to that. Another broad trend is that I'd say in the global north, there's been particular interest in the part of governments and governmental agencies and things that are called mini publics, which are basically initiatives where the participants use something called sortition, or basically random selection, to reflect the demographics of the community that they're talking about. And they come together for a limited period of time and they work through issues and they provide advice to public officials. That's at one end of the spectrum. And political science, particularly in the global north, is very interested in how to this. We have had hundreds of cases about this added over the last 3 or 4 months. Whereas we have seen growth in something we didn't really account for early on the project, in the sort of work that Julian and Bettina and Bonnie have been talking about. So it sort of builds on itself after a while. And that's really, I know we're out of time, so I won't ramble on about that anymore, but there are some broad trends and we need to do a better job of tracking that. We've been so busy, a little short-staffed, working on the next version of the homepage of the site, and getting ready for this grant proposal that Bonnie is putting in that will let a few things fall by the wayside. But we can pull some data together and maybe we can publish that pretty soon in our newsletter. Nothing you can do is go to the website, sign up for our newsletter, and you could get updates. And we won't be sending you something every week, don't worry. Thank you, everybody. Feel free again, please contact us if you have any more questions or recommendations, and we look forward to talking with you in the future. Thanks, everybody.